Hey everybody, how's it going? It's Friday night. It is been a long week, and it's Mark and Dave from Tone Talk. I hope you're doing great. We've got an awesome guest tonight. I've been excited for this. This is our first show for 2020. Happy New Year, everybody, by the way. And it's Lee Jackson from Metaltronix. Lee, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh, thank you for joining us. It's a pleasure. Dave, how are you?
I'm good. I think maybe I've recovered from Namm.
No
You did, you,
Namthrax?
you didn't get your Namthrax?
I got a little of it. My wife got the worst of it though.
Oh,
I had a little of it. Wasn't too bad though. I was pretty much pounding vitamin C the whole time. So
It's kind of mandatory at the Namm Show.
that kind of helped. Yeah, I've been going to the Namm Show a lot of years, and this keeps getting worse. This virus problem. Maybe it's because I'm getting older. No, everyone's getting more sick than they used to.
No, well, I got one of those hand sanitizer things I'd hang from my belt because everybody's shaking your hand, and I just didn't ever wanted to get the sickness.
Yeah, I found that doesn't seem to do anything. I've had years where I did that the whole time and still got sick. It's in the air. It's all around us.
well, I noticed especially this year that people tend to spit when they talk. I don't know why that is. maybe I do it also, and I'm just guilty of it as well. But I noticed that at NAMM, and I was kind of like, whoa, that's probably how you get sick.
You need to get a welder's helmet,
Yeah.
I always had this idea we should all wear little little masks with little skull and crossbones on them.
Yeah, that's well, I talked to a couple artists this week, and they were saying that they literally, because they're so scared about this new virus, that they're wearing goggles and masks on the plane. So it's like it must look great, when you go on a plane right now.
Scare the living crap out of people. What's wrong with him?
I've seen people. I just traveled this week up to Boston and out of Boston, and I saw a lot of people wearing masks.
Yeah, I could see why. I mean, the communicability is like what, 2 weeks? I mean, that's frightening. It's frightening. So yeah,
It could be.
I think I've talked to several artists that are like they're scared to death to travel. I mean, it's kind of like freezing up that whole experience.
Yeah, I can imagine that is definitely hindering, and plus they're starting to limit travel to certain places, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So,
Well, at least we're safe in our in our little cocoons.
right, in a little cocoon, right? For at least for right now, I hope. Well, good. How's Dina doing? Is she feeling better, Dave?
Yeah, she'll be fine.
Okay. All right, good. I'm glad. Good to hear.
Stop your whining.
Yeah. Well, I become a baby too.
How'd you think NAMM went this year? I didn't go because I was back building stuff because I had orders to fill, but I didn't get a chance to go this year.
NAMM was great for us. It was we have a very crowded booth. We're the company du jour, so to speak, for that kind of thing. And we always have a good time. It's fun.
No, it is. Having successful NAMM shows is fun.
Yeah.
The only one of the things I used to love to do was take the crew to Disneyland afterwards. And, and nowadays it's ridiculous how much they're charging at Disneyland to get people in.
Take the crew to Disneyland. That'll be $5,000, please.
No, absolutely. But what I used to do is I would do it on Saturday night, and then I'd buy them all ears, and I'd force them to come Sunday at NAMM wearing their ears.
Oh, I like that.
Try to get that unity going, with everybody.
Yeah, I like that.
They were good sports. It wasn't so bad. Like I used to do that back in the early Metaltronix days. I would do that 1 minute manager thing where on Wednesdays I would talk to the whole crew, and I would say you've got the most fun job in the world, if you ever wake up and don't want to come to work, please quit. Because how rough is it to build amps all day? You know what I mean? It's like we're, working with all these different rock stars that were coming in and out all day. It's like, how rough could this be?
Yeah, you could be you could do a lot worse.
Exactly. I mean, come on. So when we went to Namm, going to Disneyland was kind of part of the thing because I like Disneyland.
Yeah. Well, and plus I can only imagine after 4 days of Namm, then going to Disney World. Disneyland. I'm not sure I could do it.
I think I'd rather just At least, you know what? If you like Disneyland, I know people that love Disneyland, and and that's good for them. It's not my favorite place on earth, but
my wife loves it.
But that's okay. That's okay because I don't have to go if I don't want to.
It's not to go on a tangent, but it's just so crowded now. It's not fun.
Yeah, I agree.
The whole idea of paying all that and then getting on 3 rides for being there 10 hours and that's not the place. But back when we were doing this, it actually during Namm Show, it was like the down period of Disneyland. So it used to be pretty light. We would go and you would be able to get in and get around and actually go and enjoy the rides. But
I agree with you. I agree.
But not to go down the Namm thing, but Namm was a lot different though too in the 80s. It was.
Well, I didn't experience it to probably like 87. So I got in on the tail end of that.
Yeah, it was. It was definitely an interesting place.
When did you start going?
Hold on 1 second, please.
Sure. I like that ring.
Yeah, sorry about that. Anyway, when did I start going to Namm?
Yeah.
Actually, I started going to Namm. Oh, God, you're going to age me now. In 1976, because I was a guitar player, and there was a local music store that I bought gear from, and I just really wanted to to experience this thing called the Namm Show. And what was really, it was kind of the beginning. The Namm Show was the beginning of me actually, starting to modify gear. And why that happened is back in 76, all the company owners and the engineers and everybody used to be in the booths. It wasn't so like protected like it is now in the sense of you only have key people in the booth at any time. But back in the late 70s, early, mid 70s, late 70s, obviously as kids at that time, we were all enamored by Marshall. It was like Marshall. And I actually had gotten my first Marshall in 76, I think, as a guitar player. And I remember going to the Marshall booth, and not only Jim Marshall was there, but their engineers were there, right? And I remember going up and talking to one of them and telling him about what I was looking for on my Marshall. I was going, you didn't realize, I was looking for a sound. And I actually met the guy that had done like Jimi Hendrix's amps and worked on his. And I was like, because I was a big Jimi Hendrix fan. I said, I love this, but the amp that I've got, I think it was like a 76 JMP that I had. And I was like, I want something different from it. And I guess I asked the right questions because this guy wrote down my address and he marked up a schematic and mailed it to me. And I still have that schematic. I framed it because I found it a couple of years ago. And that started me on my route. I started going in and making the changes that he had sent me. And it kind of was the bug of starting to see that I could make changes to this thing and made it sound more and more like I want it to sound. And that's why I kept going back to Namm, and I'd go the next year, go look for that guy and say, hey, yeah, look at, I I saw what you said. How would I change this? And for a couple of years he was there, and then I never saw him again. But for those times that I did, he helped me out. And
you remember his name?
I don't. I don't remember his name.
That's so cool.
Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. No,
that was too many. That was too many brain cells ago.
Yeah, I can understand and relate.
But yeah, that was a big start because I right out of high school, I pretty much started playing professionally and I was in bands that we played the whole Hollywood circuit up and down the Sunset Strip and all, the Whiskey and the Roxy and the, Troubadour and Starwood and all those kind of things. And that was how I cut my teeth because I kept tweaking my stuff, playing live, tweaking it, playing. And we became more and more popular band. And that's really how, as time progressed, I started seeing in the audience a lot of the famous artists that I later built stuff for because they heard about this band, they heard about a sound, right? And they would start coming to the shows. I'd see them in the audience. They didn't come up to me, but I started recognizing these people in the audience. And it wasn't until much later on that George Lynch approached me and was like, I want that sound. And at first I was like, no, that's okay. That's me. It's my stuff, And that was kind of the way it was in Hollywood at the time. Everybody had their thing, right? They had their effects they used. Everything was hidden. You'd put a box over it, right? It's like, no, because everybody thought that was their, angle against the others. And finally, as everybody knows, if you don't have hit songs, you're basically sleeping in the rehearsal room, right?
That's true.
And it was George Lynch that finally kept saying, "Look, I want you to do a Marshall for me," and he finally talked me into it. So I built him one, and that's under lock and key, and that was the launch for me worldwide, doing the Under Lock and Key album. And that I literally, we used a 100 watt and a 50 watt, and I literally was in the amps tweaking them between the songs. I had the chassis open, flipped on top of the 412s, and we were doing tweaks along the way while he was working on the album. And, didn't have any idea that it was going to be that big of an album. It literally was the launch for me.
Well, that was a great tone that was on that record.
Yeah, and I went from my bedroom working on amps to getting a shop, having 12 people, because what would happen is UPS would show up. Well, people would contact us ahead of time and tell it was really easy. They wanted that mod. There wasn't like asking for a bunch of different stuff. They wanted that, so we had a set price. And one of the cool things is at the time I was working with Aspen Pittman, and he would every week come down with a car full of tubes. So it was the mod and the tubes, because I didn't want to deal with tubes. I was like, you're not going to send me your old nasty tubes, because I'm not going to sit there and modify it and then send it back to you and they fail because you have a bad set of tubes. So I'd say send me amp, no tubes, and then part of the mod is you get a brand new set of tubes and the mod. And they'd come in, I'm not kidding you, like 10 heads a day, and I'd have people that would unpack them, mark them, and I'd have the next guy literally ripping all the parts out, because we ripped them down to the empty chassis, and then another person would drill the holes and put all the stuff in, and then it would finally get to me, which I would do all the final tweaks and sign them and finalize them, and then they'd go get packed. But that was a interesting time. That was a fun time.
Wow, yeah, that sounds like the heyday of mods, right?
It really was, because there was I just started realizing there was two of us, right? It was me and Jose, right?
Yep.
We were the two guys in Hollywood. And it was really interesting because a lot of times when we worked with an artist, if there was two guitar players, one would play my stuff and the other one would play Jose's stuff. And it was actually a really good blend, like Rat, Invasion of Your Privacy. I built Warren's stuff, and that sound was a really cool blend of using two different kinds of amplifiers on the albums. That whole thing started off, first, like obviously it was George, but as soon as I started doing George's stuff, that kicked it off, right? Because what an exciting time. I mean, literally, I started off with one employee, and we would, go and talk about, how fun it would be to work with this artist or work with that artist. And the phone would ring, and he would pick it up, and he'd be talking to somebody, and he'd point at it and look at me and go, it's them. Like we had just talked about somebody, and then they called. And every week, that whole period during the 80s, every week we were getting called and working on the next, big album. I mean, from Dokken to Rat to, David Lee Roth, Steve Vai, it was like, it just kept going, the list of artists that we were working with just kept growing. I remember then we got, Ozzy with Zakk and every week was an interesting, not only an interesting time, but we got to be in the studio with them and work with them to get, what was really nice is what I learned. It was, if the artist was approaching me, they were sweet and nice. And we worked on a great personal relationship, because I learned the wrong way is if I approached an artist, then there was this attitude. If I wanted to show them something, like some artist like that I wanted to work with, if I went and contacted them and said, hey, I've got this amp I want you to try out, there was always this weird kind of, protective thing. Whereas if they approached me, it was always a really, hey, let's have fun. Let's do something interesting and create something new for you that's, going to be memorable. And I don't, I'll tell you one story was kind of fun. I had worked with Vixen, that band, that girl band.
I've worked with them too.
Yeah, exactly. Well, back when Knuman was the guitar player back
Jan,
Jan, the early days.
Mm-hmm.
And because the bass player, they knew Steve Vai, right? And Steve was getting ready to do Eat 'Em and Smile. And so I get a call from Steve, and he's like, I need your help. And I said, good, yeah, you can come on down and we'll talk about it and, build you some stuff. He goes, no, I don't have any time. I need something. You need to bring it over like today. I said, I don't have anything. We build everything to build. You bring us stuff and we tear it apart and build it. And he's like, no. He goes, you don't understand. I need this right now. I said, okay. I said, well, are you in the studio? He goes, yes, I'm in the studio right now. I said, okay. I said, what I can do is I can go home and get my personal amplifiers that are mine, and I'll bring them to the studio. So he said, yes, please do. So we grabbed cabinets. I grabbed a couple employees. We ran to my house, grabbed these amps, grabbed the cabinets, and we went out to the studio. And when we show up, there's, Ted Templeman and David Lee Roth and Steve Vai, and they're all standing there, and we bring the stuff in. The crew brings the stuff in. We set up the cabinets. We set up the heads. And at the time, I was making even a splitter, this little splitter unit that would split the audio to the two amplifiers. And we hooked that up, and they're sitting there with their arms like this, staring at me, while this is going on, like, that whole, impress me, kind of thing. And I could see Steve was nervous. And anyway, we got it all hooked up, and I get the guitar cord and I hand it to Steve, and he plugs in, and they're staring at him too. And now he starts playing, one of the songs that's going to be on the album, right? And I'm wondering how the response is. And all of a sudden, David Lee jumps up and he's just like, yes, yes. And I'm not exaggerating. He pulls a wad of cash out of his pocket and he starts passing money out to my crew, not to me, but to my crew, going, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And it was because they couldn't get a sound with those carvings. Sorry, they couldn't get the sound they were looking for that album. And this was killing. And you heard the Eat 'Em and Smile. And those are my amps, just mic'd up, And he used my stuff to finish the album. And then by the time they were done, I had all of his stuff modified and ready to go for the Eat 'Em and Smile tour. But it was fun. It was fun. David was really fun. They invited me down to the Long Beach Arena because they rehearsed for a week before the show, and got to hang out with them. And one last thing about that was really interesting is I was hanging with Billy and Steve, and David wasn't around. And this is early on. They're both young, right? And they're got these excited, smiles in their face, and they're going, We're in Van Halen. Because I remember them going, we just saw Van Halen, a couple of years ago. It's like they felt they were like the new Van Halen, and it was fun to see them being big kids, right? Not when you see people up there acting like they're the player,
Right. Well, that was an exciting time because, of course, Van Halen was still going. Or I think around that time with Sammy, and then Dave came out with Eat 'Em and Smile, and everybody was like, it was just competing bands.
They were killing it. I mean, it's a good band. I mean, Steve was playing really well, and Billy, monster drummer, that whole band was, and David was on his game at that time too. I mean, I agree. I remember one of the afternoons, David grabbed me and pulled me into he had his area that he, like one of the rooms he had tricked out for himself. And it had a big sound system that he had built in there. And he goes, here, check this out. And I said, okay. And he goes, look what I did. And he had re-recorded. I mean, he left all the instrument stuff, but he had re-recorded the whole Eat 'Em and Smile album in Spanish. And he goes, I'm selling to the Spanish market. And it was all in Spanish. It was all the same music, but
I remember that.
He sang it in Spanish. Yeah. Huevo Loco instead of, it was like,
I do remember that.
It was great. It was great.
It's not a bad idea, actually.
No, he said he had looked at the demographic and it was so huge and nobody was marketing to it. And he said, I just had to learn it all in Spanish and redo it. But
that's too
anyway.
So take us, if you don't mind, Lee, how did you even get into electronics? Was it just because of the sound situation that you wanted to change the sound? Or does it go even further back than that?
Well, as a kid, it was wild. My dad was a television repairman. And well, actually, if you really want to get back to my family, there was two businesses, and one of them was do you remember that movie Hairspray where they spun albums and that people hung out and they'd listen to music and stuff like that? Mm-hmm. Well, there was Jackson Records, and it was in Los Angeles, and it was one of those places that I was really little. I mean, there's a picture somewhere with me on a tricycle. That's how little I was during that period of time. Mm. But they spin albums, and then my dad had an adjoining business where he had a electronics television repair shop type of thing. And I was always intrigued into taking things apart, and I would take stuff apart all the time just to see how it ticked, right? I mean, sometimes blowing it up, but sometimes I'd actually take it apart, put it back together, and it worked, as a little kid. So when I progressed as wanting to be a guitar player, and of course started getting my first Tiesco Del Rey little amplifier that, I blew it up, because I didn't know what I was doing. And the other thing, what I started doing was, at that time in school, they used to have these old-timey tube record players, where they had like a extension speaker that came off the top, and if you cranked those up and it had an instrument input into it, they actually rocked. I mean, they actually distorted. And so I started just tinkering with that stuff, and progressing as a guitar player. So I was around electronics. It's something that came naturally to me. It made sense. That's the best way I can explain it. I mean, I did do some schooling, but it wasn't like, it wasn't any really intense training, but I did enough that I learned what the components did and how they worked, and and what I was doing. And then early on, and then my career as a musician kept going, because I started recording albums, doing that kind of stuff. So like I said, I wanted to improve, because stock equipment, when I started playing guitar, it didn't do what we have now. I mean, it was pretty, you either had to flatten everybody in the first 3 rows by turning it up, right? You couldn't play at a moderate level. We used to throw like blankets over stuff and to try to not hurt everybody in the clubs. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so early on, I met, I started working on my pedal board, because I had a pretty elaborate pedal board for that era when I played on Sunset. And I heard about this thing called a buffer, right? Like, oh, you need a buffer. And the only guy in town that handmade them was Paul Rivera.
Yep.
And he worked over
Buff 5 or Buff 4 or whatever it was.
No. Way before that. No. We're talking when Paul worked in a little part of that music store on Van Nuys, not Van Nuys, on what was that? It was a guitar store. It was over
Valley
on
Arts.
Valley Arts. When he worked in Valley Arts, he was upstairs in Valley Arts, and I heard about this guy. He was the guy, right? And so I go up to Valley Arts and I said, I need this thing called a buffer, and he goes, I'll make you a couple. So he handmade me these things with wires coming off them, and I remember going back and putting these things in my pedal board, and and it made it better, right? And so then I knew about Paul, right? So, and Paul is the first guy that kind of is known as the modding guy in Hollywood.
Yeah.
And because he had earlier worked with Randy from Mesa Boogie. They have some early time together. But so if you want to move the story quickly, basically I started becoming friends with Paul. Paul's then moved to his home, where he started branching off, working with big artists, right? Doing his Fender mods and working on pedal boards and doing all this stuff. And his thing grew too large that he hired me to help him. And I was part of the original Rivera research, was me and Paul, and 2 benches, me and him, just, he would do it and I would, work on whatever he'd tell me to work on. And I'd learn from him, because obviously I had to learn this stuff to help him. And we would do all kinds of mods. I started meeting all these artists. He would pass on the aspects of the different work, and I would do the work, and we kept growing along. And then at one point, Pig Nose needed help, and he said, hey, there's this gig working at Pig Nose that, they can pay you a lot more, and, they need help, and I don't know his involvement. He came up with that Cross Mix 150, so he wanted somebody there to kind of oversee that, and I said sure. So I started working for Pignose and working with Candace, and that was an interesting company, that's for sure. And
where were they based out of?
Van Nuys.
Oh, were they really?
Yeah, they were in Van Nuys. Yeah, they the story is Candace worked at the ranch with Chicago, and Pignose was a write-off that Terry Kath had come up with for Chicago. And after, I think it was 5 years or whatever the write-off time ends, they were going to just close it. Candace was there and goes, I want it. And she paid him some amount of money and took it and turned it into a company. I mean, she turned Pignose into what Pignose became. And she had this factory with all these women putting together a lot of these little amplifiers, by the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. And so later on, she wanted to grow and get into bigger amps. And she did the 3060. She did that with Quilter, Quilter Sound Products. Mm-hmm. And he worked on that. And then after that, the 150 Cross Mix came in from Paul. But yeah, so I was there, and then while all this is going on, Paul lands the gig with Fender, right? And so now he's at Fender, and I get a call from Fender, and he says, hey, I got a gig for you in R&D at Fender if you want it. I was like, yeah. I think I'll take that gig. So I left Pignose and I went to Fullerton, and they gave me Leo Fender's original office in the bungalows, and that was my office. Wow. And yeah, that was, those nasty little bungalows were, that was fun. Next to me was Harold Rhodes. And I mean, everybody that you've read about was in all these little bungalows, at Fender. And what a fun time. That was probably one of the most fun times in history because of the people involved. There was this guy named Ed Johns that was their head engineer for the company. And he was, at the time, I think he was like in his late 70s, really sharp guy. And if you look at some of those early GE or RCA tube manuals talking about 6550s, Ed Johns was one of the engineers behind that. I mean, there's pictures of him as a young man. And anyway, it became a thing where I would, every day around 3 o'clock, I would go over to his office and we'd sit there and just talk about amplifiers. And it was really a fun experience being there at Fender. One of the things I noticed when I got hired there is they didn't have guitar players on staff. Can you believe that? There was no guitar players on staff. So what they would do is they would hold these gatherings where they would set up a bunch of amps in a room, and then they would bring in all these musicians and all these techs with these whiteboards with questions on them. They'd go, so what does it need? And they would say, oh, it needs more chocolatey luscious, and they'd write that down, right? Or it needs, it needs sparkle, or it needs, this kind of thing or that kind of thing, And then when they would leave, they would go back to the drawing room and put down all these things, and they would try to figure out what these artists meant by the questions, right? And
what do you mean by chocolatey spark?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, don't you, any of you play guitar? So I'd pull a guitar out and say, let's plug it in. No, this is, and we'd start. It was interesting because they didn't play guitar. There wasn't people on staff that actually played guitar at that time. And now it's different, but back then I was like the only guitar player in R&D. It's kind of strange, but that was really a fun time. It was fun getting to be part of Fender at that kind of when they were growing, they were changing. Because Paul had worked on it was the Deluxe 2 and the Twin 2 and the concert amp and all these. It was these really cool amps that were coming out at that time, all channel switching. So that was so I during that time I also got a big feeling of corporate, and I realized that size of a corporation can't move very fast. That ship moves very slowly. You go to Namm Show and everybody's moving quickly, right? It's like this new thing, that new thing. But when you're in a ship that big, it's like, well, maybe in a couple of years we can do that. And that was extremely frustrating to me. And
so this is CBS. This is the CBS.
Yes, yeah. And so, so basically what happened is while I'm doing that, I decided, I came up with the whole Metaltronix idea, and one afternoon I went in and I said, thank you so much. I really appreciate, this opportunity, but I'm going to go try something. And I moved from Orange County back to LA and came up with this idea for Metaltronix. And I thought, make a bold statement. So I put an ad in Guitar Player magazine that said, I'll create your dreams, whatever you want, call this number. And off I did, put this page ad in Guitar Player and sat by the phone, every call started coming in, right? And every call I had to give a price and a quote right then, right? So, and people were asking for all kinds of wild things, right? And sometimes I'd win and sometimes I'd lose, because sometimes I'd be working. I mean, I'd make nothing because it was so much work and so much everything, right? But I delivered. Whatever was the question, I did it, right? And it started just building on itself, like I said, out of a bedroom. And at the time I was married, my wife wasn't really happy because my living room was full of anvil cases, and
yeah, right.
Yeah.
You know how that goes. But that's Metaltronix, ran like I think for about a year out of the house, but then I went and got a storefront, the one across the street from Wolf and Rissmiller's Rock Concert Hall that was there in Reseda, California, and that's basically where I started Metaltronix from there. I mean, for real.
Right. Hey, could we go back to when you were at Fender? Which amps did you help design?
I worked on the Deluxe 2, the Twin 2, the Concert. That's the ones I worked with Paul and the R&D crew with.
Nice.
There was other people working on the Londons, the Solid State stuff, and what was kind of interesting at that time was Paul. They wanted him in marketing. He wasn't in R&D. When you see the picture of R&D, there's this classic shot with all of us with our arms up in the air. Paul's not in it because he was actually in the front office, which was in the new building down the street. Fender had the bungalows, and then there was the main big factory, the one that everybody knows of now, which was further down the street. And so we all worked together on all the different projects. There was quite a few of us in R&D. I mean, there's I think like 20 or 25 of us that were all part of that R&D group. It wasn't just some of us were specialized, like the guys that were doing the solid state stuff, and Harold Rhodes with the keyboard stuff. That was with the Krumars and all that. That was all kind of specialized. But when it came to the other amplifiers and the guitars and stuff, we were all kind of in the same general area working together, because we'd go from office to office. If somebody needed something, I got this idea, yeah, do this, or check, it wasn't like that's mine kind of a thing. It was just whatever's the best for the overall, for the product. I got a kick. I didn't realize that, Fender's done that book 60 years. Have you seen it? Fender 60 years. It's a book about this thick.
I haven't seen it.
Anyway, yeah, Fender did this book. It's called 60 Years. Anyway, I flipped to the back in the index in the back, and I'm on 16 pages. So it's like really nice that I actually got mentioned in the book. So
that's awesome. Yeah,
that was really that was neat. Ampeg did that for me too, which was really neat. That's another part of the story, doing the Ampeg thing. But that was after.
When was that?
You move up. You start doing mods by the truckload.
Right, by the truckload.
And at the time, was there a couple different mods you were doing at the time, or was it all the?
What it was there was the core mod, right, which was basically ripping everything out and putting in tubes and redoing the preamp stage, and there was then it branched off, right? Did you want it channel switching? Did you want features that turned on and off? Did you want effects loops? And we could take it further, but the core sound that they wanted was the high gain preamp, right? I mean, that was the core thing. And so what happens is, so the mod business is rocking, right? And we're going along and we're doing this, but what we're doing is we're promoting Marshall, because all these kids are going to these concerts and looking at walls of Marshalls and going, yeah, but they go by a Marshall and realize they don't sound like that, right? And it wasn't until so what happened is people started wanting to invest in me. The guy because we had one of the first computerized systems, for sales. And so the computer guy that's putting in the system, he's, paying attention while they're putting the system in. And he's like, hey, are you looking for investment? And this other guy, and so there was a couple people that said, hey, can we invest in you? And being a young kid, yeah, okay, it'd be great. And, didn't really vet these people out, which I should have. But I was just excited that they were excited. And I had this idea for a rack mount preamp. It was what later became the GP1000. And I thought of a modular system, rack guitar preamp, rack bass preamp. And these guys came about and wanted to do an investment. And I said, okay, this is what I'll do is we'll start this company called Perfect Connection. And we'll build these tube preamps. And so we started building these tube preamps, and it was the only thing on the market like it. There was nothing like it. So the sales exploded around the world. Even distributors that distributed Marshall and these other companies, they took it on because Marshall didn't have anything like it. So there was no conflict of interest, right? So there's pictures on my website with literally thousands of these things stocked on the floor in every room, because we're building that many of them. I mean, it was unbelievable. And so that's going great, going gangbuster. Go to the trade show. Did one of the biggest trade show years I ever done before with sales. And so then out of nowhere, what was it? 88, was it 88 that came out with that MIDI preamp?
Yes, the MP1 or whatever. Yeah.
All right, yeah. So I'm not exaggerating. I had an area with salespeople, 3 or 4 of them, phones ringing all day long. We had one of those maps on the wall with pins, for the world, we're selling to. And the 88 preamp is announced. I am not kidding you. Zippo phones stopped, completely stopped. And we had a meeting with the sales crew, and they are going, people want this new preamp because it's got 128 programs. Because remember, mine's got one channel. It was a one-channel preamp. It just
okay.
Yeah.
And so it was. I never experienced anything like that. We're not talking a slowdown. We're talking. It came to a stop. I mean, it was like, nope, we're not ordering any more preamps. We're going to buy this preamp, and we're sorry. And so there was the panic of sitting in there. I got a crew of people, right, that I've got to feed, plus feed myself, plus everything. And it was a quick decision. I was like, I've got to take my mod and I've got to build an amplifier. And I said, we're going to do it because Metaltronix is known for mods and amplifiers, and we're going to, come up with this amplifier, put it in a package, and come out with the M1000 because we had to just go. It had to be like, and that's back in the days. There was no computer layout, right? I had a light table with the peel and stick.
Yeah. You have to do it all by hand. Yep.
You know what I talk about. So anyway, not to be lengthy on this, is I basically designed the M1000. We put it together, and bang! Again, we had a hit, right? Because at that time, there was no packaged modified amps, right? It was you might modify an amp, but there was nobody that had an amp already built, ready to go, right?
And what year is this?
85.
Okay, yeah.
80.
Yeah. So yeah, this is the predecessor. This was I still remember some of your amps and cabinets when I started working with Jeff Young.
Oh yeah, Jeff from Megadeth.
Yeah. I remember he had a bunch of your stuff at one point in time.
Yeah, we worked on both for him and for Dave. Yeah, because on the So Far So What album is when we worked with them on that one. And but yeah, it was so. And what was cool is all the artists that we built the modded amps for, came on board for the heads, because it's like, and we were able to start making that happen, and we started building amps and started, Paul Gilbert at the time his career was starting to take off. We had handmade all of his stuff for all the Racer X era, and then during Racer X we started getting the M1000s, so that was natural for him and Bruce to move over to the M1000s, and same thing, Zakk Wylde, he used the M1000. He also used the GP1000s going through 800 watt H&H power amps, because when Zakk came after we built the stuff for the album, we started getting the tour ready for the No Rest for the Wicked tour, and their stages are massive, right? And one of the illusions that you think about is that when you are on a stage that size, some amp that sounds loud like 100 watt is absolutely sounds like a buzzing bee in the background.
Oh yeah, it doesn't sound loud at all.
Not loud at all. And he was on a stage, and I would go to the rehearsals, because they rehearse on a full stage, the large arena kind of stage, and he would go, listen. He goes, that's even though they could pump it through the side fills, he wanted it on its own. I said, well, we can fix that. I said, but this is how we're going to do it. So what we did is we took the GP1000s and we drove 800 watt aside H&H, MOSFET power amps.
Yep.
And then we loaded the cabinets up with EVs so they could handle, the wattage, because now he's playing through 3,200 watts, right?
Holy crap.
We show back up again, bring the whole rig, and now when he goes, gawk, 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 the stage is literally literally moving up and down, right? Because of the little volume. And Ozzy wasn't happy, because he's like, I'm not ever walking over there,
Well, yeah. A similar thing when we had Steve Vai on the show. He said a similar thing when he was doing the big stadiums, he goes, the guitar tone was so loud. It was just like unbelievably, crushingly loud because it was all the power amps and the cabinets all over the stage. And
it is. It is. It is. It's amazingly, some of these artists are. Hold on 1 second. 1 second.
So I have to get to a question Michael Nielsen sent me when he comes back.
I'm sorry. I'm back.
Oh, no problem. So
okay,
your Zakk's Wild story. So it reminds me of a question that I've gotten from Michael Nielsen, who has a great channel on YouTube also called Big Hairy Guitars. He said he's psyched about seeing you on the show. He said, can you please ask him about meeting Zakk Wylde and putting together the Zakk Attack rack?
Well, okay. So basically, this is really interesting. We're doing the Namm Show, right? And just like it was going on for me, like what's going on for you right now. It was the big deal, right? The big show, lots of people, lots of you're walking, you have your crew taking care of everything. I'm just wandering around. And so all of a sudden, I didn't know it was Zakk. He walks past me. And then somebody directed him, pointed him at me. And he walks over to me. He goes, "Man, I thought you were an old man." Because, I was young, too. He's not that much older. I'm not that much older than him at that time, right? And he goes, "I thought you were some old guy." And I said, "No." And what's really interesting is my head of sales, who was Scott Quinn at the time, was the guy who taught Zakk guitar back in New York, right? So he knew of that. So he was searching us out. Plus, he'd heard about us in the industry. So he knew Scott, and they knew each other. So he went and searched me out at the Namm Show to find me because he had just gotten his deal with Ozzy and he wanted a sound, for his first album with Ozzy, and which worked out great because that was we like I said, we did a combination for Zakk. His rig was a combination of GP1000s going through, like I said, H&H power amps, and then the M1000 heads also being on, and we used because there wasn't remember again at that time there wasn't a lot of switchers, but there was a MIDI controlled Simmons drum mixer that was available that you could pre-program channels through a I think it was Simmons made this it was very high quality. And we were able to then patch, the different outputs of all the different amplifiers or inputs. If we could only do outputs of preamps and inputs of tube amps, we could then switch, and have so many turn on for a clean sound and so many turn on for a distorted sound, right? And then we had a third sound when he was soloing. He could then, have more stuff come on. And that rack, they called it the Widowmaker, was so large, and it had to be moved with a forklift. I remember, it was massive because it had heads in it. It had H&H power amps. It had preamps. It had rack effects. Plus, because we had everybody at the time, PCM 42s, all, for delays and all, anything rack was really popular at that time. And so that brings us to Zakk's guitar, right? So so Ozzy and Zakk show up to the reveal of his rig, right? They come to Metaltronix. He's going to play it before we take it to the studio, and on the wall is this white Les Paul, who my head of sales, it's his guitar, Scott Quinn, and it's got EMG pickups in it because Scott loved EMG pickups. Nobody even knew about EMGs at the time, but he did. And Zakk comes in and he sees the white Les Paul, picks it up, plugs it into the rig, and starts doing the songs that he's going to do on the No Rest for the Wicked, and flips out and says, I'm because EMG's no noise when he turns the guitar down. They were high output. He freaks out about this guitar. Well, he then, after they leave, he calls up and says, "Man, can I borrow that guitar to record the album?" And I said, "Well, I got to ask Scott, And Scott says, "Sure, he can borrow the guitar to." And I got pictures of him playing it when it was just a white Les Paul. And so after the album, he comes to bring the guitar back, and he's talking to Scott, and he's going, "I want this guitar." And Scott's like, it's like Scott's favorite guitar, right? It's his guitar. And he offered him, because he had a deal with Gibson, he goes, "I can get you all these Gibsons. I'll give you in trade for that guitar." Well, anyway, short story is he agrees, which he won't let me down to this day. He still says, "It's because of you I gave up my guitar," because for the company kind of a thing. And that guitar is the one he painted the bullseye on, because he didn't want it to be like Randy.
Right.
If it was white guitar, he didn't want to tie him to Randy, so he had the bullseye painted on it. And that's Scott's guitar. And that's the one that, history of, where that came from. And so Scott, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. So how did his rig change from tour to tour?
It didn't for a long while.
Okay.
He pretty much would use that monster, the problem is, now this is true, we had to put a piece of plexiglass across the front of everything, because he would, during a show, go over there and start turning stuff, and not just play, like just start turning knobs. And so what we did is we put plexiglass across the whole front, except for a little cutout where the output knobs were, so he could change the output level, right? And but I'm not exaggerating. I'd get a call from Sharon Osbourne saying, "There's 2 tickets there's a ticket at LAX, 6:00 tonight. Please be on." Well, she wouldn't ask, "Please be on it." And it was literally, I would fly to a location where they were playing. They'd pick me up. I'd walk into the arena. I'd get there at 3:00, right? Whatever, sound check. And I'd have to he had gotten in there and did something, right? And I'd go in there and I'd tweak all the knobs back to the way I knew the settings, and the show would roll. And they'll be like, "Hey," they're all happy and up. And that wasn't like something that just happened. It happened a few times. And
I've been there.
You know what I'm saying?
I've been there.
One of the weirdest things is when they did the live, when Ozzy did the live HBO concert, right? Sharon requested that I had a complete second rig built, right? I mean, complete, exactly the same, 2 of them, because this live television, there is no, "Hey guys, we're coming back." It's live, right? And so we built the second system, and it had a big throw switch, like something like Frankenstein, right? That I had in my hand, a remote, that if anything went wrong, I could hit this switch and the whole other rig would light up. It was already mic'd, already ready to go there, And I remember we got there 3 days before the live HBO, and there was a clock on the wall, one of those digital countdowns, you know what I'm saying, where it's like, 62 hours, and then, 24 hours, and then 5 hours, right? And then literally the television roll, it's like all of a sudden 3, 2, 1 live, and it was like, so I'm sitting there, you can barely see me, but I'm stage right, sitting there with, my whole job was to sit there with this, switcher to switch him over but nothing went down. So it was, it's good, because the audience wouldn't have known, but it was good that I was there, just, to do it. But that was a fun time. Ozzy was fun. He was an interesting fellow to hang with,
I can imagine.
It really, I'm serious. What's really wild is when he's on stage, he's a different person than when he's off stage, right? Because you've never heard him mumble when he's singing, ever. I mean, he sings perfectly, right? And I saw that happen when he would walk up to the stage, he would transform into Ozzy, right? And then he'd walk off stage and he'd go back to mumbling, and it was pretty funny.
Yeah, it
great,
is.
Really great guy. Really great guy. That was fun.
Yeah, he actually just came out that he's diagnosed with Parkinson's, I think.
I know that's he used to sometimes, because we lived close to each other in Malibu, sometimes I would take a plane with him. People didn't even know. He'd wear those sweaters and wear the outfits. People didn't know it was him. We'd be sitting, and it was really fun because it would be like somebody hit a switch, because most of the time he'd be really quiet, just sitting there in his seat. But sometimes it'd be like hitting a switch. He would just wake up and start telling me stories, about Black Sabbath and, experiences. And it's like, I got to tell you one thing that was fun. I'm sorry for babbling.
No. Keep going. We got all the time in the world.
Right, people?
So we haven't even got into the Ampeg story, but I'm at Ampeg, right? And it was we're building stuff for Zakk, because all the artists came with me, right? Because it was part of what was going on at the time. And so Zakk shows up. It's the biggest blizzard storm in St. Louis. It was unbelievable. And Zakk is hanging out with me because we're working on his new rig. And so it's the weekend. And I didn't know it, but Geezer had a house in St. Louis. So Geezer was in town too, all right? So we're trying to think about something to do. And Zakk's going, man, I want to go out, But I said, it's a blizzard. I mean, literally a whiteout blizzard storm. So somebody had suggested, and it was hilarious. Somebody says, hey, there's a Black Sabbath cover band playing at this club downtown, St. Louis. And I said, let's go. And he says, well, let's call Geezer. And I said, okay. So he calls Geezer up, and Geezer meets us in front of this place. I mean, we're talking blizzards. I mean, we shouldn't have been out in it. It was horrible. So we gather together, and this band's playing, right? And it's a nice club, but it's got seating right right across the front of the staging area. Stage is probably 10 feet away, kind of a thing, right? So we get up and we walk and sit right in front, right? 1, 2, 3. Geezer, Zakk, and me are on the very first front row, right? And this band is playing Black Sabbath songs and dancing around the stage. And it was at one point the singer looks down and realizes that Geezer Butler, Zakk Wylde are sitting there. I mean, it was like they stopped playing and they're like, you're kidding me, right? They're saying this, and they were like they were godsmacked, right? And they're like, well, we they come down and they get Geezer and they get Zakk and they say, well, we can't play here, you come. And Zakk got up there and Geezer got up there and they played the Black Sabbath songs while the other guy was singing, and it was a fun night. The people in that club got a treat. It was
that's awesome.
It was fun. It was fun to see the reaction, because I can imagine if I was that cover band, sitting there playing and seeing my idol were in the audience,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, that would freak me out. So tell us about your days at Ampeg. How did that come about?
Well, so
let me interrupt real quick. By the way, Jeff Young is in the chat.
Hi, Jeff. Tell him
And a few other people that apparently you modded amps for.
Oh, good. Well,
Dave Marshall.
Oh, Dave Marshall.
Dave,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Dave's a good friend of mine.
Yeah, tell him hi.
Who else said it in here? There's a couple other people in here that said they got stuff from you.
Well, yeah. Absolutely. Anybody, I don't mean to be so long-winded, but you were asking,
No, you're doing good.
Awesome. So basically, what happened is this is the depressing stuff, right? So Metaltronix is doing extremely well. For the 80s, we're doing about 6-8 million a year, which isn't bad for a tube amp company. We're our sales are, that's not bad for that era. We're rivaling Marshall. We're running ads against each other. I mean, Metaltronix and Marshall. I did the Built to Blast, and they did the hand grenade. It doesn't have to be loud to be great. I mean, we were like, going neck and neck because I had a lot of major artists, were using our product on a lot of. I mean, just about every platinum album during the 80s was using Metaltronix. I mean, it's we were definitely the company to come after. And so, like I said, I had gotten these investors early on. I didn't vet them out. And without getting into the day-to-day stuff, basically I had a what they call a minority shareholder conspiracy. They tried to take over the company. And the public never knew. We just all of a sudden, one day, Metaltronix is not there. And right, like when the engine's running full throttle, all of a sudden it's like, hey, wait a second, what happened, right? And we got into this legal battle, and it just made more sense for me to sever our partnership. And that's the easiest way to explain it. And we weren't one of those companies that fizzled out. We actually shut down at the peak of our sales. It was the stuff behind scenes that was going on, and it ended. And so now I'm sitting in my house freaking out, going, my God, my whole life, it's come to an end. It's stopped, right? And the phone rings, and it's the president of Ampeg. Now, the president is not the owner. The president is just the president of the company. And he calls me up and says, hey, because I guess the news ripped across the industry of what had happened. And they said, are you available to talk? And I said, yeah. And he goes, if I send you a plane ticket tonight, can you get on it tomorrow and come out and visit us? And I said, okay, I'll do that. So I get on the plane and I fly out to meet with these guys. And they said, look, we're expanding. We've got this new division that we're going to do. And, we've got this company Crate that's doing really well. So we've got all this financial situation going fantastic. So we bought Ampeg, and we want to give Ampeg its own thing in the industry. And, would you like to do it? And they basically said, we're going to build this new R&D facility, and you're going to be a major part of it. And we're going to build you a whole area. And you've got to access all these people that draftsmen, and I didn't have to do my own layouts and all these things they were offering to me. And I said, okay, not realizing I didn't really, I'm living in Malibu. Now I'm going to live in St. Louis. I'm sorry, but
yeah, a little different.
That part I did not enjoy. I'm sorry, guys in St. Louis, but that was not the lifestyle I was looking for. But anyway, packed up everything. And by the time that I got out there, they had finished the building. They had gotten the whole brand new R&D facility, and it was all ready to go. So all I had to do was design a new amp for that year's Namm Show, which was the VL series, the VL 1002. And because that was the first thing I did with them. Later on, I started doing Crate stuff and, helping them. I never put my name on it, but I helped design it. And because once again, it was kind of like Fender. There was, we all kind of, oh, that's a cool idea. Let's try this. And, I had come up with that self-biasing with the LEDs, which then that migrated over to the SVT because it was like, oh, I like that idea, you know, and it's all good because you're all part of the team, you know, you're all, you know, working together kind of a thing. So, yeah, you know, during actually, so I go out there and I start doing that. I'm really bored because there's nothing to do there. You know, you come from California, there's so many things to do you know, when you're time off. Luckily, the president told me that, you know, you need to have a boat because you need something to entertain yourself on the weekends. And because that was kind of a thing that all the engineers and people of Ampeg, they would go boating on the weekends, and we'd all kind of moor out, you know, on the river and give us, you know, something to do because there wasn't a lot to do there because it's either extremely cold or extremely humid. You know, it's like, you know, it's not like going from Malibu where it's 70 degrees, you know, it's like now I'm looking at this extreme weather. So so what was kind of interesting during that time is I wanted to get back into doing some playing, and I went to one of the local music stores and I said, hey, if you know of any musicians that want to jam or, you know, do some playing, I gave him my number. I said, I want to, because I always have had a studio in my house. I said, you know, I'd like to do some recording. Well, anyway, a short, quick story on that is the bass player for Banshee calls me up and says, hey, can I come over? I want to, you know, so we start writing together, and surely what we ended up doing was putting Banshee back together. We grabbed the singer and the drummer and everybody and just put Banshee, which was a pretty popular Midwest band. They were a big metal band. And I had the horsepower of my amp, you know, doing amplifiers. So I put it into, at this time, it was right early on working with Banshee. And so I started, you know, playing in that band while I was working at Ampeg. And so then that rolls us into Lee Jackson amps, because what's going on is I'm at Ampeg, and I realized, you know, I really dug them. They were really sweet people, but you're working for, again, a corporation, right? And I was like, God, you know, I want to do this on my own, right? I you know, the corporate thing was just, it's a corporation. You know what I'm talking about. And
yes, I do.
So I go to the Namm Show, and I start kind of letting the word out that I might be interested in doing something else. Nicely, you know, it was just, you know, one of those kind of things. And I got contacted by, you know, the golf club company Ping, right? Yeah. They were investing in all these companies. They owned Horizon Wire Company and Rapco, and they were investing in all kinds of stuff, right? And they said, can we have a meeting? And I said, sure, let's have a meeting. So I met with them because they're based out of St. Louis. And they said, if we gave you all this money, would you put an amp company together? And I said, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. So
sure.
I know. It was really, so I resigned from Ampeg, and I hit the ground running. They built a brand new factory for me, bought all new machines, you know, CNC machines, and, you know, we put it down in Cape Girardeau because that's where Horizon was, and they wanted to use Horizon's office people, you know, their corporate, you know, accounting, because that's one of the things I said, you guys deal with the accounting, I'll just do the designing, and, you know, we'll get this going. So we started the Lee Jackson amps, and started building those, which was the XLS series, and started doing really well again because the artists that we had, again, moved from Ampeg over with me and started using the Lee Jackson stuff. And that was really fun. During the same time, Banshee started taking off. So because I had a crew, I could be gone doing the Banshee thing, and come back in and, work on designs and then have them build them while I was off getting to play music, which was kind of the best of both worlds. I got to play and build stuff,
Yeah.
So that was that was an interesting time. During that time, because Banshee was starting to take off, they were based out of Kansas City. So I ended up buying a house in Kansas City and literally basing myself out of there, and then driving into Cape Girardeau, every other week, kind of a thing, to check on things and make sure everything was going right. And if they needed me for anything, because once the crew was set up, they would just build it all. I just designed it, they'd do all the building. And so that was a fun time, because Banshee was starting to do really well, and we started, doing a lot of shows, and which was fun. That was a fun time. But
that's cool.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah. Well, when did when did you migrate back to Metaltronix, starting Metaltronix?
Well, okay. So and I hate this to be a common theme, but once again, it wasn't Ping, but it was the people they hired. We found that there was something not going right. And so I had a talk with them, and they decided that it was in their contracts. They said, look, we'd rather why don't we just close this down and give you a severance, and, you can, we'll just, once again, the public never knew. Always ship product, no problem. It wasn't like it was dying. It's just they decided it was better that they wanted to deal with it their own way. And I said, fine. I had no word on that. I couldn't say anything. So at that point, I could live anywhere I wanted to live. And I'd always used to come to Austin back in the Metaltronix days. I used to come to Austin as my decompression place, right? And so I said, I'm going to move to Austin. So I came down to Austin and moved in. And
so what was this? What year was this?
1999. I think 1999, right around there. I think so, because it was, it was definitely 1999. And I had met the Kempers, who built a lot of Austin. I had met one of the kids actually was a musician I met out in California. So I had connections when I moved here into town, and they had me set up to meet all these different bank presidents. And I went in and I pitched them. I said, look, I have some money. I just want you to match my money, and I'll on minimum, I'll hire 20 people, and we'll start building amplifiers. And over and over again, I'd hear from the bank president, well, we just don't invest in musical instruments. If you made tape dispensers or something, I was like, but Austin's the music capital of the world. I know, but, and it was almost like scripted. I heard this over and over again. So I got frustrated. So I stopped talking to bank presidents, trying to get funding. So I had heard about this rehearsal room called the ARC, Austin Rehearsal Complex, which was let's just say it was the barber shop for the music industry here. It was where everybody came through. That's where I met the Eric Johnsons and all the artists that you know of in Austin rehearsed at this place. And I talked to the owner and I said, can I get a room in here just to set up a shop, kind of start back to the old Metaltronix kind of days, right? Mm-hmm. And they said, yeah, that'd be awesome. There's one in the corner. And to cut through that quickly, during the time I was there, I met everybody. This was early Austin. This was before Austin became what Austin is now, which is basically another Los Angeles. It's grown up so much. But I met all the artists that you know and hear of that are based out of Austin, from the Billy Gibbons, the Eric Johnsons, those guys, and became friends and built gear for them and kind of started that up again. And after a point, because of the growth of Austin, they lost that building and they weren't going to restart it again. So I went and set up my own deal out in the countryside. And basically, over the years, I put out a bunch of different products. I put out a bunch of different pedals, and I did this one-line amps I called Four Knobbers, which were based off of what the artists in Austin, Texas wanted, which is, EL84, little guy, only 4 knobs. You crank it up and it rocks, kind of a thing. And so to move quickly, basically I did that for several years and had fun. I came up with that reverb pedal, Mr. Springy, right? That thing exploded, right? I never had a product that I sold that many that fast. I'll tell you one quick story. Is I developed it as a lark one day, and I let a couple people check it out, and they're like, "Oh, I want one of those." So I said, "Okay." So I started laying out circuit boards and doing that kind of stuff. And at the time, I had one of those credit card accounts that would ding when somebody paid for something, right? You'd get a ding on your computer, right? So you hear a ding once in a while, ding. Oh, I sold something, right? Well, I remember one Saturday morning I woke up and I'm sitting there, and it was weird. It was like, I don't know what time of the morning it was, but it started going ding, 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 and then went off like a machine gun. And I was like, oh no. And it went on for a while because I'm thinking, how am I going to supply that demand? And it's like, and it did that twice. Like it did that Saturday morning and it did it on a Sunday morning with this machine gun of sales. And that thing exploded. I built a lot of those. And it got to the point where the chips I was using, the quality, I had to throw away 2/3 of the chips to get 1/3 that worked. And I even dealt with the company and I proved it to them because I went to an outside testing laboratory and got all the specs and mailed them off to them. And then they believed me, but it's still, they didn't change the chips. So I basically, it wasn't worth it anymore because I literally would have to buy, 10,000 chips to get 3,000 that worked, and they were really expensive. And it just, so that came to an end, but we built a lot of them. It was a fun time, built these reverb. And by the time I got done with selling those, the industry started selling reverb pedals. So it was a good timing that I got out of it. So to how Metaltronix started again, it came out of, I just put a word out on Facebook. I just put a thing out. I'm thinking about, because I didn't realize, and I don't mean to be naive, I didn't realize the love and the level of Metaltronix people, across the world. I didn't realize it. I've been so busy just trying to, get things going and moving them. And so I put a little word out on Facebook that I was going to design a new Metaltronix amp, a new M1000 or M2000. And once again, I got inundated. I did not understand the amount of people that sent me emails and contacted me, and it was unbelievable. I mean, it was thousands and thousands of people going, yes, we want this amp. You build this amp, make this happen. So I decided, okay, it's time for Metaltronix. It's actually exactly 30 years. It was like 30 years, I think. One of to the time that I announced the M1000, and I thought, if I'm going to do this, it's got to be the scariest thing I've ever built, and it's got to be something totally different than I've ever done before. And there were some real things that I wanted to address, and one of them, and you well know this by working with vendors, is I didn't want anything to do with wood. I'm sorry, wood guys.
We have our own wood shop, so we're okay.
No, yeah, absolutely. Now, see, with Lee Jackson amps, I had my own wood shop, and with, obviously, Ampeg, but that wasn't my company. We had a wood shop. But, other than those companies, I've had to deal with wood vendors and wood shop people. And I'm not even going to get into the headaches dealing with wood people. And they are always, they either treat it like it's a fine piece of furniture and want to charge you $1,000 to make a head box. You know what I mean? It's like, which is horrible to the consumer because you're just trying to build a high quality product. So I attacked it saying, okay, that's going to be off the table. We're not going to use wood, right? And so that became its own new fun thing because what do you do, right? What do you do that's different? What do you do? So I got this idea, and the metal guy that's been working with me, I said, look, I got this idea. They told me it was impossible. We got a guy in SolidWorks to prove it out that it could be done. And basically, you're familiar with like a Shelby Cobra, right? Aluminum, how they form aluminum bodies and do all that stuff. Mm-hmm. Well, this thing, it's formed, welded, ground. It's an ordeal, but it is beautiful when it's done. But it is so much work that it's aircraft aluminum that's formed in shape, and it's all helio-arced. They just call it arcing, I guess now. And then it's all ground down so it looks like it's glass, right? You don't see any of the welds or any of the corners or any of that stuff. And then it's anodized and painted, and it's really, it's actually lighter. The head box is lighter than a wood box, but the amp's not light because I'm using huge transformers, so the amp's heavy. But
it's a 100-watt amp, right?
It's a 100-watt amp.
Of course, it's going to be heavy.
Yeah, the chassis itself weighs about 48 pounds, which is not light. And it's an aluminum chassis too. But so there was things I wanted to do, like if you remember the original M1000 is very Art Deco. I was really into Art Deco, and I designed the lettering and the way the whole thing was very based on Art Deco. So I wanted to kind of like, if I'm going to go to M2000, what am I going to do differently, and how, and what are the things I'm going to keep, right? And the things that I wanted to keep was the way the logo looked, and the way that the way the knobs are reset into the faceplate, and that kind of stuff that I did with the M1000. And so I did that. And the other thing that I did differently on this that I hadn't seen anybody else do before, and I know why, because of the sheer cost, is I did concentric knobs, and they're full-size concentric knobs. So the front, so all the knobs and every knob is you can set right from the preamp to the presence, right? And
so you had to order 1,000 of each knob, didn't you?
They're all Bakelite, and yes, I had to order ridiculous numbers of knobs. But the thing that really is ridiculous is nobody makes the pots, so I have to buy all the parts from CTS and build these pots myself. So the cost is astronomical, but it's the end result is what I wanted, and it worked, and it works because I'm able to not put a bunch of knobs on the face panel, right? And I'm able to get 2 channels out of the amplifier, but do it with concentric pots. So that worked out really well, and I had come up with a new design that I'd never done before. And you know how you draw on paper and you work on stuff over the years, because I've worked on so many different projects. I had this idea, and I thought, well, I'll try it, and I threw it together and hit the power switch, and I was like, yes, okay, I'm ready. This amp, this is the one that's going to be the one, and I'm ecstatic about it. It seems to be being accepted really well. The old Metaltronix guys are praising it. Because that's the thing you always worried about. Did I hit it? Did I get the thing that they wanted? And I'm excited about the sound of it. I like the demo that I did on it. It was very simple. We just threw some mics up and just recorded it. Like I said, this is the way it sounds. And I had this artist, Demir, he's a huge star in Turkey. He's a metal guitar player in Turkey.
I know Demir.
You know Demir? Yeah. And he's here in Austin, and I asked him. I said, "Did you play guitar on this video?" And he said, "Absolutely." I said, "Great, this because I wanted somebody else other than me playing the guitar. I was like, here's somebody else." And we're now lining up a bunch of artists that are going to come in, and I'm going to start releasing videos of other people playing. But yeah, if I have one here, I have one sitting beside me here if you want to see it.
Yeah,
please.
I'm actually really curious about the head box. It's kind of hard to tell probably.
Can you see it here?
Yeah, we can see it. Yep.
Yeah. So it's so what I did here is this is all water jetted out, right? The front aluminum, and so the whole thing is aluminum, every piece of it. And like I said, there's aspects of it that I wanted to keep, like the original Metaltronix had the sunken handle, so I did that. And like I said, it was kind of fun. I'm designing this new pedal, distortion pedal that I've got Eric Johnson right now is using. That I came by his place to drop it off, and I had this in the back of the car, and he goes, "Hey, can I look at that?" And he thought it was when he first looked at it, he thought it was black lacquer wood, because it looks like it looks like it's all finished wood, but it's not. It's aluminum. You can hear it's aluminum, but it's got.
That's very cool.
Yeah, it's got edges on it. It's not conducive for like high volume, because the amount of work that I've got a basic luthier that sits there and hand welds these things and puts them together. So moderate numbers are all good. It's that I couldn't do like the early day numbers, that kind of numbers per month, because I'd have to have a crew of welders welding this thing. And I've thought at times of possibly offering it in a doing the same thing but with wood, just so I can get the numbers up volume wise. But I don't, we'll see. As time goes, I'll address that. But right now we're fine with doing it this way, and I'm kind of starting off, again back. I'm starting off kind of. I'm actually enjoying this. I'm kind of starting off like the early, Metaltronix. I'm doing this myself again. I've got this really cool shop out in the woods, and it's got beautiful windows overlooking the woods. I've got wonderful vendors, like the people that are hand making me all the individual pieces, and which I then just put together, in my place. And it's actually really enjoyable for me, because I've learned my lesson with investors. Finally, it's taken a lot of years, but I finally, it's funny, because even with doing this one, people are coming out of the woodwork. Hey, you want me to invest? I'll get, it's like, no. I'd love it to find that great partner that, would be, somebody that I wouldn't have to worry about. But at least when I'm doing it myself, I don't have to worry about that. And it's kind of therapeutic, doing this. It's kind of fun for me, and I'm they're coming out sounding amazing. So it's been an overall really fun experience. And one of the things I didn't say during this, right before Metaltronix, I don't know if you've seen this, but that company, the company back in the 70s that did the Univibes. Remember Univibe pedals?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They're called Shinai. That company, yeah. Shinai. Well, this guy bought the trademarks and branding of that company, Shinai, and he contacted me and said, "Hey, I've known him for a while, doing other projects, but he goes, would you design all our products? Because we're going to come out in a big way. We're going to reintroduce the Univibe. But we want to put some things in there that kind of brings it up to date, like leave the core of it, the sound of it. But, if you think of something, we want to do something." And so I got involved in that a couple of years ago, and I designed all of his thing called a Vibro, which is, using all these NOS parts he scoured around the planet and did that. But what I added to it was a switch so you could bypass the preamp or no preamp, because most of them, the preamp's on all the time. So you don't have really a true bypass, but you can have it if you want it. The other thing I designed is when you plugged the foot switch in, the speed controller, it would sense the pins and it would turn on the foot controller. But if you unplugged it, it would sense there's no pins there, and it would go to a knob on the front. So you could have the speed controller there. So did that, and that did really well for him. And then he wanted to redo all of his distortion pedals, so I did all those for him. Just basically kept them, like they were back in the 60s, just putting little things like, protection to not die if somebody puts a battery in backwards and that kind of stuff. Mm. And then about a year or two in, he came to me and he said, Lee, if you want to release something of yours in our product line, I would love for you to do it, and we'll just split the deal with you, because all the other stuff I did with him, I'm just paid as an engineer, like a project. I just get paid. I don't see any residual on any of that stuff. I just get paid. He gets his product. But he came to me and he says, "You have an idea? I'd love to see it and put it out." And I said, "Okay." So I went home and I thought, man, I don't want to do a distortion pedal. This was years ago. I don't want to do a delay or reverb or any of this stuff. And during that time, I had been modding like 1073s and API 312s, and for a lot of artists, Eric Johnson, all these different guys, I was modding their preamps for their mics, for the studio mics. And I started learning how that stuff works and what makes it sound the way it does, and so what brings me full forward is I was thinking, well, maybe I'll come out with a gain pedal. And I thought, because I'd done that gain pedal back in the Metaltronix days, the active gain booster, and I thought, no, I don't want to do that. So one day it came to me. I said, well, why don't I put like an API 312 or a 1073 in a box, because I just love the sound of that. And if I preset all the EQ and just basically put the knob on the front, the gain knob, which you have on the preamp normally, right? And if you turn it all the way down, it's Unity. So I started working on that. And the key to that was that this thing had to run on a plus or minus supply, right? And so I started working on that to make that happen, to run off a standard battery, right? And to get enough juice, because you got to have a lot of juice for these things. And the second thing was, how do you fit that many parts in a little box, right? So, you'll appreciate this. What I did is, remember the old transistor radios where all the resistors and stuff were standing, you remember you'd open the back up, it was packed like every single square inch, And anyway, I did that, and I came up with this pedal called the Big One. And what this is,
I've never seen that.
Yeah, this is an $8,000 studio preamp in a box, and the industry's it's hard to explain. You don't even have to use it as a gain pedal. you just plug it in. Like, when you're using a U67 or U47 and you're plugging into your console for your microphone, and if you plug directly in your console, it doesn't sound like that magical mic, right? But if you plug it in through a 1073 or an API 312, right, all of a sudden the birds sing and the skies open up, and that voice that you've gotten used to in the studio, what I'm saying, it's not an EQ, it's just bigger.
It's got a tone.
It's just bigger, right? Well, that's what this does. Is you could use it as a gain booster, but most people don't. They just set it at unity, and you just plug into it. I've got, one of the bands I've been working with the last couple of years is in that band Styx, and Tommy and Ricky, the bass player.
I think I've heard of them.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. They flipped out when they went to Europe. Like Ricky, the bass player, all he took to Europe was one of these and his bass, because he just plugs into it and comes out of it, and he's like, I'm completely happy. It's hard to explain. I'll tell you one more quick story. You know Roscoe Beck, the bass player, Roscoe with Eric Johnson. I've known Roscoe for many, many years. So when I was just starting the build these, I stopped over his place for lunch, and after lunch I said to him, "Hey, I got this new pedal. I want you to try." And he's like, "Lee, I don't want to see a pedal. I've got plenty of pedals." I said, "No, Roscoe, please just humor me." And finally he goes, "Okay." So we went into his studio, and I plugged him through this, turned it off. I plugged it through he loves this Bassman he plays through in one of his basses, and he starts playing. And while he's playing, I click it on, and he's not really noticing I clicked it on, but he's really having fun. He's playing, and then I hold it out like this, and then I turn it off while he's playing, and he looks at me, and I turn it back on, and he keeps playing, and he looked at me, and he just shook his head, and he said an expletive at me, and he goes, "I guess I have to have that now." It's like it does something where it not an EQ. It's not. It enhances the sound. Just going through it. I put it on the front end. You can put it on the front of your guitar rig. You can put it in the after your guitar rig, and like I said, you can use it as a booster if you want. It's got 30 dB of boost, so it's got plenty of boost if you want to overdrive. But this was a fun project. I'm working on one more with this company that'll be out in a couple months, which is going to be another fun toy. Nothing to do with this, but they've been a fun company to just. It allows me to just be a designer. Just design it, let them have it.
That's awesome. You know what? I'm going to get to some questions in the chat.
Please. I've been talking too much.
No, you're good. You're awesome. So there's actually a question for Dave. That was a super chat, like way.
Now I want to hear the pedal, though.
What's that?
Now I want to hear that pedal.
Yeah, exactly. What's it called?
You just
email
me after this. Email me after this.
Okay.
I'll take care of you.
Dave, longtime customer, wondering if the SLO 100 has the immediate pick attack and the in the amp feel like your amps, or if it's slower like a diesel.
It's a different amp than my amps, but it would be more immediate than a diesel, for sure. Yeah, way more immediate, but different amp sound, different circuit than mine.
Okay. I mean, it's like comparing an SLO 100 to your amp. It's a completely,
it's a completely different amp.
Yeah.
Well, it's a completely different amplifier.
Yeah.
It's a different beast.
Yeah. Here's a question for you, Lee. Wyatt Willis, can Mr. Jackson elaborate on the Big One booster and how Eric Johnson uses it?
He uses it with his acoustic. He right now is on, not right this week because he's on tour doing the Viacom tour where he's got Roscoe and he's gonna kill me not to remember his name. Breckline. Yes, yeah, Breckline playing playing drums, but he's doing the rock thing. But when he does his acoustic thing, like anything you plug through the big one, I mean, it enhances the sound. So he uses it on his acoustic guitar for that, for when he's doing his acoustic tour. I'm building this new distortion pedal that I've come up with that he loves for his rock stuff. You know, that's something totally different. But you know, you can even plug a mic into this. Obviously, you have to put a high impedance transformer because this is not low impedance input. But you can plug anything into it. Keyboards. It's got tons of headroom. You can plug bass, guitar, anything on the front end.
Very cool. Here's a question for you, Dave, from Joel Eakins. Dave, what's your go-to cables when you're building pedal boards? I've been using solderless cable for years, and I'm tired of the headaches.
Yeah, no kidding, right? Don't use solderless cables. Just asking for trouble. Oh, wow. You know, so I've used all sorts of things over the years, right? Most of the time now, I use a Mogami cable, like a small Mogami cable, like a 2314 cable or 2319. And then most of the time I'm using square plug ends now, which you can get from, you can buy them online from Redco or Bestronix. It's another company. Mm-hmm. Bestronix actually the distributor, but they sell them retail also.
Another company that we're friends with is Signum Music, Vinny Moretti. If you guys want to get some handmade cables. What's that?
Who was in the chat or is in the chat somewhere?
Yeah. We'll get to his question as well. Nick H says, Lee, can you talk about Paul Gilbert's modded Marshall he used on the first few Racer X albums?
That was modded identical to what I did for George Lynch. The difference is he liked 50 watts, so we used to mod 50 watts for him. I remember what was really interesting is you know, Metaltronix was well going when Paul showed up. He showed up. You know, Paul, he had just come from the East Coast and he was just starting to go to GIT, and he shows up with his 250 watts and he plunks them down and he goes, "I hear you're the guy." And that, you know, he was like tall, lanky, really dressed geeky because he just came from the East Coast. He never been in the scene yet. He just was going to GIT, and he didn't play. He just dropped his amps down and took a tag and left, right? We didn't know anything about this guy, so we modded his amps. And one of the things that we used to request, we had this area in the front where you had to play your gear before you left. You had to sign our wall and you had to play the gear, because if you weren't ecstatic, we weren't interested in, we just didn't build it. You had to be, you know, part of the experience. And so, you know, a week or so later, Paul shows up, and and he was just going to come grab his amps. And I said, "No, Paul, you got to play." So we plugged in his amps, and picks up a guitar, and it was Paul Gilbert, right? I mean, he was that good when he first arrived in LA, and he didn't know it. He thought that all guitar players in LA played as good as him, and he had no idea. His first band that he played our stuff in was it Black Sheep, which was the band that he played first before he put Racer X together. And but then he put Racer X, and he launched so quick in the Hollywood scene because nobody had seen anybody play guitar like that. I mean, nobody played like that. I mean, Paul was in his own world, and he didn't know it at all. I mean, he didn't realize that he was that talented compared to the people out there. And so the mod, it was the standard mod that we were doing. I didn't mean to get on a tangent, but it was where we added a tube, changed the tone section, the input section. We would work on the output stage if it needed, you know, to be tightened or whatever to make it have the overall sound that the artist was looking for. Because obviously, too, we would be working on whether you played in small places or large places, because that's a complete different thing, too, because an amp that sounds good in a large place doesn't sound good in a small place, because it doesn't. You actually need more gain in smaller places than you do in larger places. We discovered that early on, that really super high gain amps don't work really well in the large stages. A real quick here is during the Metaltronix peak, AC/DC calls me, to come down to the Forum in LA because they want me to custom build them their amps for their next tour. And I said, well, I'm going to come down during sound check. And Angus sets up his stuff and starts playing, right? And I at the end of it, I said, I'm not modding anything. Your sound, going through that wireless system into those amps, into that rig, don't touch anything. I seriously, I said, I'm not touching this. You've got, it wouldn't have made it better. It really would not have made it better to add more gain to his rig. It would have actually made it mushy. And one other band during that same era was the Scorpions, and I told them the same thing because they did the same thing. They used that Schaefer, either the Schaefer or one of the other pre's on the wirelesses. They just crank them up, and when those amps are lit, going through 50,000, 100,000 watt PAs, that's the sound. I mean, now it doesn't work if you're playing in a small club. Obviously, you need more gain, or you could use some kind of pedal or something. Yeah. But anyway, didn't mean to get on too much tangent on that.
No. That's great. Yeah, because what do you do? It's Angus.
It's Angus.
I'm not gonna fucking touch anything.
No, exactly. The thing was during that era, we were so popular and we were in all the magazines and everybody's talking about us. It was, we started working on album after album. It was so fun. I've got all these, gold and platinum albums thanking me for album after album. It was an exciting time. So a lot of bands started thinking, well, we just got to have this done if we're going to be in that circle type of a thing, right? And that's, for bands like that, it's like, no, I did it because I wanted to help people get a sound. I just didn't want to do it just to tear their amp up, right? It wasn't. I remember, working with Eddie Van Halen, right? Eddie, quick story on that. I'm in my house. It was on a Saturday, laying in bed, and that's back when we used to have those tape machine, recorders. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't answer it, right? And it clicks and it says, hi, who you've reached. And I'd never heard Eddie talk before, right? I didn't know his voice. And the thing clicks, and Eddie has like a little voice, right? And he's saying, hi, this is Eddie. Zakk Wylde gave me your phone number. I really need your help. Please give me a call. And I thought, it's one of my friends, having fun with me. Because, how we used to do that stuff to each other, call like you're somebody. And, And so anyway, I called the number back, and Valerie answered. She goes, hold on. And it's Eddie. And he's like, hey, my number one amp is blown up. And I need help. We're doing this for Uncardinal Knowledge album, and the amp that I use is dust, and can you please help me? Well, at that time, I had this guy, there's a picture of him on my website. He was this Armenian guy that lived in an apartment in Hollywood, and he used to rebuild transformers.
Arson or something? Or Arson or Art?
Yes.
Name?
Yes. And
I've heard about him.
I contacted him. I mean, his house was something to just, he'd bake them in the oven. His house looked like a shop, right? So, so Eddie had blown the output transformer, but he didn't want to change anything. So I took the transformer, took it over to this guy. He disassembled it, put it back together just like it was original, right? Baked it, did all that stuff. And I remember Eddie bringing out these 4 6 CA7s like they were this gold. Okay, now here's the tubes, because they are gold, because you can't find them. Now put these tubes in, and only these. And I was like, okay, no problem. And put the amp back together, which I then realized it's 100% stock. There is nothing. I worked on it. I'm telling you, there's nothing done to it. It is a stock Marshall. It's all based on that Variac, turning it down.
That's been confirmed by you, Dave, John Sir, and Mike Soldano, all on the show. So I think
it is absolutely stock. Okay, so let me tell you. I'll finish this real quick. And so I put this thing together, I test it, and I take it back to 5150. Right, put it on the cabinet. They're all there. They're recording the album. And I stay in the the tracking room, not where the studio. I stuck with the amp just to stand there, right? And he starts, he's in the room in there playing, and I'm listening to it, and I'm going, wow, that doesn't sound like Eddie Van Halen's amp, right? I'm thinking, oh, I destroyed it, I'm thinking that something's wrong. And then I walked through the bathroom into the studio, and there's the sound. And I realized a lot of that sound is created after that amp, right? The Pultecs, the compressors, the all the stuff that he plugs into that the engineer uses gets that sound of his, right? Because as you heard, that album sounds just like his other stuff. And that's that amp, because I stood there with it as he played, which was fun because, he'd sit there with that cigarette playing and have a conversation with you while he's tracking, not missing a beat. I was phenomenal player. But I hate to burst people because I used to get calls all the time. Well, I want an amp like Eddie's. Really?
Okay, well, you gotta do this and this and this and crank it on 10 now. Good luck.
Well, the funny thing is that Jose made a living on amps that Eddie never played.
Yeah, I know.
Never played.
No.
I'm sorry.
He worked on a bunch of his amps, but that's the extent of it.
He mainly worked on Michael's bass amps, because that Jose was one of the original Ampeg guys.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how Eddie met him, was that he would work on Michael's bass SVTs, right? And so he started, working on Eddie's amplifiers, but not basically fixing them, right? I don't know how the mod thing came about, but he basically came up with these high gain mods that like I said, it was you either went with mine or went with his.
Yeah, it's just down to a matter of taste. You like this pizza or this pizza?
Exactly. Yeah. And generally, and here's something
one of both.
Well, I was going to say, here's one thing that you definitely can relate to, is it was always horrible to build 2 rigs for the band, because inevitably one rig would always sound better. You build for 2 guitar players, right? Mm. Same rig, same everything, right? And it's not a case that one's bad and one's good. It's a case that one's exceptional and one's really good. And one guy would always. So I hated doing that. If I had to build for 2 guitar players, it actually was better if one of them used somebody else, because I didn't have to sit there and go, oh man, mine doesn't sound like his. It's like, because transformers, everything's different, right? Transformers, capacitors. I mean, it all has different personalities, and so I know you've experienced that, because you have to. They don't all sound the same, and they all have a different magic to them. Anyway, go ahead. More questions.
Yeah, we've got a question from Harmonicaster. Pickup question for Dave and Lee. All other things, magnets, wire gauge equal, would a pickup with 10K of DCR have a third more gain than the one with 7.5K?
Well, what about the magnet?
Yeah.
And what strength of the magnet? What kind of magnet?
Well, I think he's saying all things equal. The magnets, the wire gauge, those things are equal. But a pickup that has 10K versus would it
Would it have
versus 7.5.
Well, it's gonna be harder.
third more gain?
If you couldn't say exactly a third more gain, because you're right, a magnet's going to change it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, if all things are equal, but nothing's ever exactly equal.
Right.
Right.
So a third more, it would have some more gain. How's that?
Yeah, it's definitely going to be hotter because it's just a hotter. It's the impedance going to change, right?
Probably have more mid-range.
Right. I mean, that's one of the things that's nice right now with all the new high gain amps is that you can now use lower output pickups so you can control your distortion, you can control your feedback. Like right at the time that I started doing all the mods, people were coming out with these ridiculous pickups like Mighty Might and DiMarzio with like stacks of windings,
super distortions, and
more than super distortions, they were the ones like with the big Allen bolts on them, and I'm talking about they had like 24K
right,
on
the intruder or something.
The intruder, right?
Yeah, the invader.
Whereas of course, if you stick it into a stock Marshall that doesn't have very much gain, it helps. But nowadays, it's a hindrance. It has no tone. Like, I mean, that's why nowadays, like an old PAF is awesome. I mean, the tonality is really sweet.
It's true. It's true. Question from John Gerson. Hey, Tone Talk, please ask Mr. Jackson about the Jackson JG3 heads that were available for a short time.
That's not me. That is Jackson Guitars.
JG3 heads? But you're saying heads. There were...
Yeah. Jackson Guitar for a short period of time before we went into court together. They had to stop building amplifiers because there was a conflict of names.
But that wasn't Grover though, was it?
It was after Grover.
Yeah, that figures.
It was after Grover. It was when Grover was sold to the next group of people, and they tried to shut me down, and it went the other direction. We went to court against my logo against theirs, and I said my logo is my signature, and it is. It's my actual signature. And I said you have a stylized logo, Plus, I've been in business longer than you, and courts agreed with me, and so they had to stop building amplifiers. But that was, sorry to say, but that was a now their amp was a copy of one of my modded amps, as I hear it. So in a sense, it's close,
Interesting.
But no, it's not me. Sorry.
No. Well, thanks for clarifying that.
So here, Mark, we had Modern Vintage who accidentally retracted his super chat, but then is asking it again, and he asks, "Are the JEL, the JJ, the SS100 worth it for the B100 Deluxe owners, or can the B100 Deluxe do that?" Well, the B100 Deluxe can do a lot of that. Not the JEL new amp. It doesn't do that at all, really. Like maybe the Plexi channel would do the Plexi sound out of that amp, but the other ones it can simulate it, although it's not exactly the same circuit. Maybe the one that can closely simulate is the JJ. So there you go.
Okay. We've got a great comment from Everett Guy. He says, "I'm playing my M2000 right now."
Oh, Everett, tell him hi. Yes, hi, Everett.
Yeah, I gather he can't hear us if he's playing his M2000 right
now. Right. Like before.
Right, exactly. This is from Dave Britton. "Hey Lee, I still love my Lee Jackson modded Marshall 100 watt with an effects loop you did in Reseda."
Yeah. Oh God, Reseda.
And then David Marshall says, "Lee modded my amps too, 1986, I believe."
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what Dave Britton said.
Yeah.
All right. I'm just going through the questions now.
Yeah, please do.
Dave, you have any other questions that popped up to you while I'm just reading? Here, I've got one from Vinny Moretti. He says, "Hi Lee, were you friendly with Dennis Kager?"
No, who is Dennis Kager?
He has an amp. Apparently he passed away, but Vinny has an amp from him, and he thought you were friendly with him or knew him in some way.
I'm sorry to say, but I might. I met so many people, but no, he's not somebody that I like is in my phone book or anything.
No worries. Let's see. I'm just scrolling through. There's a lot. Hi Lee, what power tubes would you suggest if I replace them in my Lee Jackson modded Marshall 100 watt head?
I'm really starting to like these Mullards, the reissue Mullards. They can handle the high voltage. They seem to be really stable once they're, especially if you get them pre-burned in, like from Antique Radio or one of these companies that do tube testing. They seem to be really, really stable, and that's one of my new favorite tubes. Tubes are such a difficult subject right now because the quality is not very good across the world, and as you know.
Oh, I know. Oh, we've had long talks about this before. The EL34 Quest, what's reliable, and the Mullard is a good tube. For years the JJ EL34 was good, and then it fell apart and it was horrible.
I'm sorry to say, but I can't stand JJs anymore in any form and fashion.
That's fine. I don't use them anymore at all. Unfortunately, I do have to use an occasional preamp tube for the microphonic stages,
right?
Because you can't get something that's in big numbers. That's
right. Absolutely.
Works. Other than that, I like Chinese preamp tubes. Generally speaking,
they've got the best edge on the sound.
The best edge, yeah. So we settled on EL34s because they wound up being the most reliable for us. Although I didn't put the Mullards into production, so it's a good tube. It's proven to be really reliable. It's proven to be not many sets failed, so I'm happy about that.
Absolutely, that's a nightmare.
I mean, the only thing, yes. So we started with the JJ power tubes, and then that started failing. We went to Chinese EL34s. And when those fail, they just arc tube sockets. So that's a really bad thing.
I had a bad experience.
We left from that, went back to JJ's, and those really were horrible again. And then we went to the EH, and we've stayed.
EH has always done a good job with their tubes.
Yeah.
Really, they have. There's nothing. They might not be, the flavor you're looking for, but they're safe, and they keep going. And that's the problem, I mean, the reality really is NOS, there's nothing like if you get an old set of tubes.
Sure.
I mean, a new set of old tubes, but there's not a comparison. It's almost, they're 3D. There's a depth to the old tubes that the new tubes don't have. They might have the width, but there's this depth of like looking into the picture that they just don't have, and it's really frustrating, And now the only thing that's available out there is the tubes they didn't want to sell 10 years ago, right? I mean, that's what
exactly for NOS tubes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So
it's dried up, and good luck. I always say to people, I go, well, yeah, if you find a good set, that's great, but if you're going to have to change your tubes on a regular basis and you're not just maybe a hobbyist playing your amp, don't be doing that, because eventually you're not going to be able to replace them.
That's true. No, that's true. And you're going to be really depressed because the sound, I remember one afternoon I thought, I'm going to go pull my, tube box out that I have of all this Bugle Boys and all this vintage stuff in boxes, which I can't believe a Bugle Boy now is $400. But, I pulled them out and I plugged them in the amp and it was like, oh yeah, okay. I mean, it was like so different, like not a little different. Like I said, it's like all of a sudden you've got this width, but now you've got this depth, right? And it's depressing because I wish there was some company out there that was really making like old timey tubes. But I remember talking to Aspen about it years ago, and I guess it's too caustic, the chemicals. They can't do it, and there's not even a third world country out there that'll put their people through it. So
yeah, it's
right.
Unfortunately. Darren D says, which crate amp did you design, Lee?
I did the Stealth series, the tube stuff.
Okay.
I did the Stealth series amps, and that was really fun because Crate was doing really well, so they actually had the bigger budgets, so I could really have fun working on stuff. There was no limits. When you're working for these big corporate companies, they give you limits on stuff based on sales, right? You only get this much advertising. You only get this much, based on how well that line is doing. And Crate was actually doing. Crate. It's amazing to me. Crate was doing incredible until Loud Industries, bought it, and they for some reason they closed it. I have no idea why, but it was a popular amp.
Yeah, they were on fire at a time.
But yeah, I did the whole Stealth series. We did head versions and 100-watt versions, and I did them with four 6v6s or 2 EL34s or 4 EL34s. So I did a bunch of different versions of the Stealth series.
Cool. Thanks for the question. Everett Guy says, I was curious if Lee could tell me on my M2000 I just got from my serial number which amp number I got on the first run. Serial number 200-106.
He got number 6. I gave him number 6. So I wanted he'd been waiting for it, and I wanted to get him his amp. So he's part of the first run of amps that are shipping. So he's number 6.
How many are in the first run?
15.
Oh.
We've got a lot of great comments that the amp looks amazing. There was a question on how much it is.
It's 49. It's 40. 49.40. It's basically 49.50.
Okay. Cool. Let's see. Someone wanted to know who's the guy behind the curtain.
Which curtain? Back here?
Oh no, the behind the camera.
Oh, over here with me?
Yeah.
Owner of the studio.
Ah, cool.
Yeah, this is Studio 71, and it's owned by David Gaylor. This is his personal playland, and he's a musician that built this place, and it's a beautiful studio. It's probably one of the nicest studios in Austin, and it's not open to the public.
Yeah, it looks beautiful.
We use it we do all the amp videos here. We mix projects here. Like I said, I get a chance to work on projects, which is fun, to mix from, I got to work on, I get that album 10 by 10 with, what's his name? Guitar player, played with Sammy Hagar. Ronnie Montrose. I engineered one of the songs, Kingdoms Come Undone. Joe Bonamassa played guitar on it, and I was the engineer on that song.
Awesome.
So that was fun. Ricky Phillips from Styx played bass on it. My connection with that was Ricky, because I was working with Ricky, helping him do pre-production for the Styx album, the last one that just came out, The Mission,
Right.
and helping because Ricky lives real nearby here, and so I was helping him. And while that was going on, he was finishing up the Ronnie Montrose album and asked me if I'd do that. I said, sure, definitely.
Oh, wow. So that must have been just right before he passed away, I imagine.
No, it was after he passed away. What happened is Ronnie and Ricky were recording the 10 songs, and after they got done with the 10 songs, he was diagnosed with the cancer, and he went and took himself out, and it was really sad. And Ricky told his wife that he would finish the album. So what he did is he got 10 singers and 10 guitar players, and nobody stepped on his parts, and they wrote all their parts around it. Like Joe Bonamassa just plays a solo through that song.
I'm going to listen. I haven't listened to that. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, it's a great album. Sammy Hagar probably does one of his best songs. He sings on it, and all these really eclectic people are on that album. It's funny if you go buy that CD, it's got a fold out in it, and I happen to wear this really bright blue shirt, and so you'll see me. It's like I glow out of one of the pictures. It's like you'll see it's me. It's like, oh, there you are. Yeah, because Ricky calls me and goes, "Yep, you wore the right color shirt. You're
popping.
You'll be noticed." That's
funny.
But they're very nice. It's been fun working with them. Especially the Styx guys. They're right now recording another new album, which is going to be released here pretty soon. Really good guys.
Yeah,
if you get a chance, check out that show.
I did. I actually saw them live. It was them, Def Leppard, and Tesla. And Styx killed it.
Kill it.
Yeah, they were actually Tesla was the opening act. Actually, I think Styx closed it, but yeah, they were amazing. I forget who closed.
What they do, they alternate, right?
Yeah,
They were alternating between Def Leppard and Styx.
Styx closing,
always,
yeah. Here's a question from Music Therapy Laz. Dave, what are your thoughts on the flat patch cables from EBS from Sweden? They're flexible and small and soldered, of course.
They're cool. They work well. They are small and very thin, for sure. I've used them before and some stuff. It works great.
Okay, cool. Corey James Guitar, awesome interview so far. Keep up with the tangents.
All right. No, sorry, I don't want to talk too much.
No, you're doing great. What might change on a non-limited edition JEL? ?
That has not been determined if that will be done yet. So.
Okay.
What might change? Well, probably most likely, if it is done, it's probably going to be the cosmetic, and no signature, and no certificate, and and no red ever again.
No red.
Can't even custom order it that way. I did a JQD signature amp at this NAMM. And it was wildly popular, and it's red. And all the limited run is red, signed, and with a certificate and everything, and that's it. Done.
50
no more red ever again.
That's it. So we've got a question from Modern Vintage. What do Dave and Lee think of the Waza tube amp expander regarding retaining amp dynamics, feel, etc. versus a cab? Particularly with complex bends in areas where the modelers fail.
Well, the Waza is a reactive load into a solid state power amp. If you're talking about just going direct with it, I mean, it's your guitar is still plugging straight into the tube amp, and the reactive load is reacting like a speaker. So it's still retaining its your dynamics and your the feel and everything that the amp normally would. So it depends on how you're using it exactly, but it's quite a good product.
It's still a reactive load. That's the problem. It's it's close, right? I mean, it's one of those things that there's a trade-off on any of them when you're plugging into a reactive load, right? Because what the problem is with a real speaker, right? You've got energy going in and out, because a speaker becomes a basically electromagnet, right? Mm-hmm. And so you get energy going both directions, which the reactive load tries to do that with capacitors and inductors. And so it's always going to be a trade-off sound-wise, just like the any of the really good high-end, reactive loads that all the different bands are using, out there. It's better than not doing it, to me, but it's not the same as putting a mic in front of a cab.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Oh, yeah, I understand. Yeah, what you're saying about that. Yeah,
it's I on the early days with, I don't know if you know, but Aspen Pittman had his rack preamp tube amp.
Yeah,
I designed that for him, right? And I also worked on the speaker emulator that was in it, right? Yeah. And we worked with some people, I'm not kidding, at NASA that he had connections with, where we did a bunch of tests to see why a amplifier, sounds the way it does, and why a mic, and that's where we used some really amazing test gear to see how much the speaker itself does. There's two things the speaker does. One thing is it's an electromagnet, so that when energy goes into it, it also, when it closes back in, it creates an electrical charge and actually comes back into the power output transformer, right? It causes this forward, backward. The other thing that happens is the natural filter of the cone is an EQ on its own, right? That it has a complex EQ just for the sound going through the paper, right? And because if anybody's ever listened to the output jack of an amplifier, it's pretty hideous.
Oh yeah,
it's it's unlistenable, right? And people have tried putting just different filters, squared off and stuff, but but Aspen was one of the first guys to do a speaker emulator, system, and I remember I was on that team working with him on it. And it was, how we originally did it. We had all of these like multi-band, all these like 32 band equalizers, rack mount. And we were sitting there tweaking bands and listening to it, and then listening to a mic, and then tweaking bands, and then basically just set up an EQ that just did that, curve, But again, it's not the same, God love all these emulators, and I'm sorry to step on anybody's toes, but they all sound great 2D. If you plug a real tube amp against anything, it shines so far past even the best of them out there. And I know it's easier to carry an emulator amp out, on the road, because it's no tubes and it's no, but it's not the same.
Oh yeah, we totally.
You're not bark.
Yeah, we totally agree with it. Yeah, I mean, I've got a Kemper. We talked about it before. It's a feel thing. It's the sound's getting better, but it's still a feel thing. The way you feel it.
Yeah, I mean, it's you hit the great. You see those guys doing like Eddie's thing, sounds, and they play their chords and stuff. And if when we go on a quick little tangent, I came up when I did the GP 1000. I had built this amplifier in my test bench that we would test the GP 1000s with, and Scott, the salesman, would hear me testing these all the time, and all of a sudden, one day he goes, "Why aren't we building that power amp?" Because this power amp I designed had like 20% distortion. And it had all these characteristics like a tube amp. And it really, if you just heard it on its own, it sounded like it really made the GP1000 sound really good, and it also made a lot of 88 preamps sound good too, because they bought them a lot.
I was gonna bring that up. Where did that power amp come from? I own two. I love that power amp. It's great.
It was a unique idea, the way that it's stable but not stable, right? It's like it does this dance thing. But my point about bringing this up was, I was at the time working with Steve Vai with the amplifiers, and he lives in the studio, and I had just finished the SP1000, and I brought it over his house, and I said, check this out. I said, it sounds like a tube. And we played it by itself, and he's going, oh man, this sounds great. He goes, let's check it out. So what he does is he goes and he quickly sets up two cabinets, one with a tube power amp, my power amp, throws up mics, says, let's go back in the studio, and he starts playing and A-Bing with the mics in a closed environment. And it's like, okay, the tubes are off. It's obvious that the real tubes are real tubes. I mean, the other amp sounds great. If you never put it up against a tube amp, you don't hear. It's the nuance that you were saying. It's that little change that I'm just saying. I'm not saying that these other amps are not usable, and they're definitely usable to play low volumes. Man, they're fun for that. So you can play real quiet.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, turn it up loud, and then that's where the difference. Yeah, I totally agree with you. So I know Dave does too.
Anyway, enough about it. Any more questions?
We got a question. It's just interesting. I don't know if you've seen the Synergy modules. People are like, Metaltronix Synergy module. They're preamps. So it's a
modular preamp system, like the old Randall did it for a while. Then it was an Egnator product originally, and then and now the company that makes all my products with us owns that.
Okay.
And a bunch of different companies have done their own modules. Like
so like the idea of making a module for it.
Yeah.
I'd be open for that. Randall contact. Remember when Randall was doing that?
Yeah. Same concept, but this is kind of the version 2, the better version now of it.
Yeah, no, I'd be open for that. Just send me emails and we'll talk about it.
It's mailbox money.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying is I'm always open for building stuff that people want. I'm serious. If I can make something that is impressive, that people go, oh yeah, I like that, then I'm completely open for it. So if we could talk sometime if you want, and talk about it anytime.
Yeah. Sure.
Well, I've gone through all the questions. I think we've exhausted the questions, and
well, do you have any questions of your own?
How can people reach you to get in touch with you about your amps?
Either through leejackson.com or metaltronix.com. There's I have the two websites. They both intersect each other they both contact back and forth. I've got the YouTube channel too, which is Lee Jackson. But yeah, I can be contacted. It goes directly to me if you go to the website.
Perfect.
And
cool.
I get to people as fast as I can. Like I said, I'm doing all this now on my own again, which is fun, but it does take my time.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. But that's awesome. So the amp is available. The pedal is available that people can buy.
This pedal. Okay, so the big one you have to buy. It's just like we were talking about. You have to buy this through Shinai. I don't. I designed it. I am on top of. I do watch over production, but they are the ones that sell this. I don't sell this pedal, but they do. So Shinai.com is where you get that from. Or he's got a bunch of dealers, so I'm sure you can find a dealer that sells it.
Yeah, I'll put a link in the inside in the description
Oh, good.
on the video. And speaking of that, also I should mention our sponsor, Sweetwater. You guys should go to Sweetwater, check them out. They're running all kinds of specials. So sweetwater.com. I'm going to have a link in the bottom if you guys want to click that link for Sweetwater and purchase something there. You can use that link. And let's see. Any other things from you, Dave?
No, I think that was we got the whole history right from the beginning, beginning to the end.
I wasn't boring.
No,
it's not the end yet. It's the continuance.
Yes.
No. It's it's kind of interesting the industry. I know it's becoming a synthesizer world. I mean, that was obvious by what I saw out. I wasn't at NAMM, but I saw the different people broadcasting from NAMM, and the synthesizer world is definitely big right now. And guitar, we need another guitar hero, right? We need a guy that comes out and is that, because I thought about that. I thought about that was like in the early years, there was like new guys coming out every week out of the woodwork. You just a new sound, a new person, a new style, and right now I'm not seeing that happening. I'm not seeing that player that's coming out and taking command of a new style.
Yeah, no.
And
very true.
And not turning the guitar into a synthesizer either. That's not really.
No, we don't want that.
That's kind of fun. Like you see those new Gibsons, right? That have it's like it's got a ton of things built into it, right? That does I think 128 different effects, and have you seen that new Gibson guitar that they're doing? It's it's built in a fire body. It's anyway. I'm just saying is that's not the way to go either. But
no.
I mean, I definitely. Oh, I wanted to one quick thing. So during the Metaltronix years, which is really weird synergy. On the wall, the guitar that everybody played and the guitar I used to tweak amps from day one was a white Dean that I got from Dean back in the late 70s, right? Or like late 70s, right there. And it was their, what's it called? They call it now the Cadillac, but back then it was not called the Cadillac. But anyway, that guitar was used, everybody played that guitar. You name it, the guitar players that we've been talking about, they all played the guitar because it was the guitar you played when you tested the amps. It was always on the wall. And then when I went to work for Ampeg, I got this hair. I had, Ampeg, they own Alvarez. They had a paint shop, wood shop. I took it in and I had a Floyd cut in it and painted red. I know. Ugh. Okay. Never touched the guitar again, which is sad. I loved that guitar. It sat in the case last year. Out of nowhere, this is before I even started building the new amp, right? I decided, I love this guitar. I've got to put it back. So I stripped it down, took off all that horrible red. I went and found a beautiful piece of mahogany that was the same grain as was that guitar. I then took the guitar to my guy's metal shop, and we milled the pieces of wood to stay same grain, fit perfectly in the guitar, fill up all the holes, lined up all the grain, glued it back together, and then I took it to a luthier who, put everything perfectly back. I had the original parts, so the original Zebra pickups and the original bridge, and the only thing I did change the pots to 550s, the CTS, and also Bumblebee capacitors, and put this thing together. Because of the lacquer, it takes a long time. I found a chip inside of one of the pickup holes of the original paint color, so I was able to match the paint from the one hanging on the wall. Painted the guitar. Okay, it got done one day before the power was turned on the new M1000 or M2000 to be tweaked. So it was originally the guitar that tweaked the M1000 30 something years ago, right?
Right. It all comes full circle.
It's freaky, isn't it? Like, I didn't plan this, that it got out of the paint shop, done and assembled the day before the head was finished. So it literally, I plugged in the head for the first time with the guitar and tweaked it with the guitar. So it was like, to me, it was kind of a sign that I was going the right direction. It was kind of like, this cool. And it was wild because I put it up on Facebook, the guitar, and I didn't realize the massive level of Dean lovers, right? They were like, oh yeah, it's called an Elite, Dean Elite. That's what they call it. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, there's a lot of, especially vintage Dean stuff.
Oh, and it sounds absolutely amazing. It's like,
cool.
It's back to my favorite guitar again. It's like,
that's awesome.
Yeah, cool. That's a great story.
Well, we love it, man. Lee, thank you so much for coming on the show. We really appreciate it. You guys.
Well, I thank you. It's fun.
Oh, no. Don't need to thank us, man. It was a total pleasure to have you on. Amazing stories. Check out Metaltronix. Check out Lee Jackson. Hang on one second, Lee. When I hang up, then we'll say goodbye off air.
Thank everybody out there. It's fun to talk to you all.
Yeah, it's been awesome.
Been great.
I'm not sure when the next show will be. I'll post it on Facebook. Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button, and we'll be in touch soon. Have a great weekend. We'll talk to you later.